The wagon wheels carved deep ruts into the frozen earth. Constance Merrick watched the forest close in around her, tall pines heavy with early winter snow. Each jolt of the wagon sent tremors through her spine, through the carefully packed trunk at her feet, through the letter folded in her pocket, the one that had changed everything. She was 24 years old and traveling toward a marriage to a man she'd never met. The driver, a weather-beaten man named Porter, hadn't spoken in hours. Perhaps he sensed what she carried with her wasn't just belongings, but the weight of a life unraveling. Boston lay 3 days behind them now. The city with its cobblestone streets and church bells, and the grave where Edmund Carlyle was supposed to be buried. Supposed to be. Constance closed her eyes. She could still see it the night 2 years ago when the settlers' homes burned. Edmund running toward the flames, the screams, the silence that came after when they found only ashes and blood. She'd mourned him properly. Worn black for a year, let her heart turn to something cold and distant, something that couldn't be heard again. Then her father's creditors had come. "Almost there, miss," Porter said, breaking the silence. His breath misted in the November air. Constance opened her eyes. Through the trees ahead, she could see smoke rising, not from destruction, but from hearth fires. The settlement of Millbrook appeared slowly, cautiously, as if the forest was reluctant to let it exist. 20 houses, maybe 30. A meeting house with a modest steeple. Plots of cleared land stretching back toward the tree line, brown and stubbled, with the remnants of harvested crops. And beyond it all, the endless wilderness that swallowed the horizon. This was the edge of the known world. This was where daughters went when their father's debts came due. The wagon rolled past the first houses. Faces appeared in windows, pale ovals against dark interiors, watching. Constance kept her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. She'd been raised in Boston society, trained in the art of appearing composed even when everything inside was breaking. She could do this one last time. The wagon stopped in front of the meeting house. Pastor Hutchins emerged, a tall man with silver threading, his dark hair, his face weathered like old leather. Behind him stood another man. Constance's breath caught. He was tall, taller than Edmund had been, broad through the shoulders in a way that spoke of physical labor, not leisure. His hair was dark brown, almost black, pulled back simply. He wore plain clothes, a linen shirt, leather vest, woolen breeches. Nothing fine, nothing wasted. But it was his face that held her. Not handsome in the way Boston men were handsome, with their polished smiles and calculated charm. His face was all hard lines and sharp angles, a jaw that looked carved from the same stone he probably worked. A nose that had been broken at least once, and eyes, gray eyes, that looked at her with something she couldn't name. Not hunger, not even curiosity, just a deep, careful stillness. "Miss Merrick," Pastor Hutchins said, offering his hand to help her down. "Welcome to Millbrook. This is Silas Hale." Silas didn't speak. He nodded once briefly, and Constance found herself returning the gesture because she didn't know what else to do. "Shall we proceed?" the pastor asked gently. "I know you've had a long journey, but your father's letter requested we conduct the ceremony as soon as you arrived." Of course he had. Speed was essential when one was selling a daughter to satisfy debts. "Yes," Constance heard herself say. "Let's proceed." The meeting house was simple and cold. 6 witnesses had gathered, required by colony law. Constance recognized none of them. They were strangers watching strangers bind themselves together in the sight of bond in the Commonwealth. Pastor Hutchins opened his Bible. The pages rustled like dry leaves. Constance stood beside Silas Hale and tried not to think about the last time she'd stood in a church. Edmund's memorial service. The empty coffin. Her mother weeping into black lace. "Dearly beloved," the pastor began. The words washed over her. She'd heard them before, imagined them before, but never like this. Never with such cold practicality, such absence of joy. Silas stood perfectly still beside her. She could feel the heat of him in the cold room, sense the quiet power in his frame. He didn't fidget, didn't shift, just stood there like one of the old trees outside, rooted and unmovable. "Silas Hale, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" A pause, so brief she might have imagined it. "I do." His voice was low, rough, the voice of someone who didn't use it often or lightly. "Constance Merrick, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She thought of her father's study. The letter he'd made her read. There's a settler in Massachusetts who needs a wife. Good land, good prospects. He's willing to accept your hand in exchange for enough money to keep the Merrick family from complete ruin. I do. 2 words. That's all it took to change everything. Pastor Hutchins smiled a gentle, sad smile that suggested he understood more than he said. By the power vested in me by the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and before God I pronounce you man and wife. He didn't say Silas could kiss her. Perhaps he saw that would be too much too soon. The witnesses murmured their approval. Someone produced a registry book. Constance signed her name the last time she'd write Merrick as her only name. Then Silas took the quill. His hands were large, scarred along the knuckles, stained with something dark that might have been soot or forge scale. But his writing was careful, precise. He signed Silas Hale, and then below it, Constance Hale. She stared at her new name. It looked strange, foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Come, Silas said quietly. I'll show you home. Home was a cabin at the eastern edge of the settlement. It sat alone, separated from the other houses by 100 yards of cleared ground. Behind it, Constance could see another structure, smaller, darker, with a chimney that leaked thin smoke into the gray sky. The board. Silas lifted her trunk from Porter's wagon with ease, as if it weighed nothing. He nodded to the driver, some silent understanding passing between them, and Porter clicked his tongue at the horses. Then they were alone. The cabin was timber-framed, chinked with clay and moss. A single door, 2 windows with real glass that surprised her. Glass was expensive this far from Boston. Someone had spent money on those windows. Silas pushed the door open and stepped aside, letting her enter first. The interior was neat, sparse but clean. A fireplace dominated one wall already laid with wood ready to light, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding dishes and supplies, a rope bed in the corner covered with wool blankets and furs. 1 bed. Constance's throat tightened. I know it's not what you're used to, Silas said behind her. He set her trunk down carefully. But it's sound. Roof doesn't leak, keeps the cold out. She turned to look at him. He stood in the doorway filling it, but somehow managing not to feel threatening. Just present. It's fine, she said and meant it. She'd expected worse. Silas nodded. He moved to the fireplace, struck flint to steel. The tinder caught flames, spreading slowly to the kindling, then to the larger logs. Heat began to fill the space. There's a root cellar, he said, not looking at her. Stocked for winter. Smoked meat, dried corn preserves. You won't go hungry. Thank you. Well's 30 paces north. Doesn't freeze even in deep winter. I see. He stood, brushed his hands on his breeches. For a moment, he just looked at her. Really looked like he was trying to understand something he couldn't quite grasp. I'll leave you to settle in, he said finally. I have work to finish at the forge. He was leaving. It was barely past midday, and he was leaving. Constance felt something twist in her chest, not disappointment exactly, but confusion. What did married people do on their wedding day if not? If not, she pushed the thought away. Will you return for supper? She asked. Another pause. If you'd like. I would. Silas nodded once more, then turned and walked out. The door closed softly behind him. Constance stood alone in her new home and listened to his footsteps crunch through the frozen grass toward the forge. Then the ringing of hammer on anvil began, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of iron. She unpacked her trunk slowly. Her clothes, her mother's Bible, the few books she'd been allowed to keep. A miniature portrait of Edmund that she wrapped in a handkerchief and buried at the bottom of the trunk. The day faded into evening. She found supplies and made a simple meal, cornbread, salt pork, boiled turnips. Not fancy, but solid. The kind of food that stuck to your ribs and kept you warm. Full dark had fallen by the time she heard his footsteps again. Silas entered, bringing the smell of smoke and metal with him. He'd washed his hands and face were clean, his hair damp. He looked at the table she'd set at the food waiting. You didn't have to, he said. We have to eat. They sat across from each other, ate in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of utensils, the crackle of the fire, the wind beginning to rise outside. Constance watched him when she thought he wasn't looking. The way he ate slowly, methodically, like everything he did. The scars on his hands, the line of his jaw, the way shadows pooled beneath his cheekbones. He looked tired. Not just today tired, but bone-deep weary, the kind that came from carrying something heavy for too long. When the meal was finished, Silas stood and cleared the dishes. He pumped water from a bucket, washed them clean. "I'll bank the fire," he said. "It'll keep through the night." Constance's heart began to beat faster. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading since Porter's wagon had started rolling. Her wedding night. She moved toward the bed, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the laces of her bodice. "Constance, with eyes." She turned. Silas stood by the fire, his back to her. "I don't expect. I won't ask you to." He stopped, seemed to search for words. "I know this isn't what either of us would have chosen, but I won't make demands. You have my word on that." She stared at him. "I don't understand." He turned then, and in the firelight she saw something in his face, something raw and honest. "This marriage was arranged for practical reasons," he said quietly. "I needed a wife to keep my land, Grant. Your father needed—" He didn't finish. They both knew what her father had needed. "But you don't have to be afraid of me. I'll sleep in the forge. You'll have privacy here." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "The forge," she said, "but it's cold." "I'm used to it. You can't sleep there all winter." "I've done it before." He was serious, completely serious. Constance felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built to keep herself safe. Because this man, this stranger she'd married, was offering her something no one had offered in 2 years. A choice. "Why?" she whispered. Silas looked at her for a long moment. "Because you deserve to feel safe," he said simply. "And I won't be another man who takes something you haven't freely given." He gathered a blanket from a peg by the door, nodded once more, and left. Through the window, Constance watched him cross to the forge. Light appeared in the smaller building's window. A lantern lit, a banked fire stirred back to life. She stood alone in the warm cabin and felt tears prick her eyes. What kind of man did this? What kind of man kept his word before it was even given? Morning arrived gray and cold. Constance woke in the bed alone, properly rested for the first time in weeks. The fire had burned down to embers, but the cabin still held enough heat to keep frost from forming on the inside of the windows. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, splashed her face with water from the bucket. When she opened the door, the world was silver with frost. The forge's chimney was already smoking. She could hear the hammer ringing Silas at work before dawn, like any other day. Like he hadn't spent his wedding night alone in a workshop because he'd given his wife the only real bed. Constance stood on the threshold and made a decision. She would cook breakfast. She would bring it to him. And she would begin to understand what kind of life she'd entered. She worked quickly. Porridge with dried apples, fresh bread she'd found in the cold cellar wrapped in cloth. She heated cider with spices, poured it into 2 mugs. Then she walked across the frozen ground to the forge. The heat hit her first when she pushed open the door. The furnace burned bright in the dimness, casting everything in orange and shadow. Silas stood at the anvil, hammer in hand, working a piece of glowing metal. He didn't stop when she entered. Couldn't probably metal demanded attention while it was hot. She watched him work, fascinated despite herself. Each strike of the hammer was precise, controlled. He shaped the iron like he could see what it was meant to become, like his hands were just helping it find its true form. Finally, he plunged the piece into a trough of water. Steam hissed and billowed. When he turned, he seemed surprised to see her there. "I brought breakfast," Constance said, lifting the basket. Silas looked at it, then at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but something softer than the careful stillness. "You didn't have to." "You keep saying that." "It's true. So is the fact that you need to eat." This time his mouth did quirk slightly, just at the corner, just enough to suggest he was capable of amusement. They sat on a rough bench near the door where the air was cooler, ate together as morning light began to seep through the cracks in the walls. "What were you making?" Constance asked. "Hinges for the Widow Thatcher's new door." "The Widow Thatcher. Lives on the west side. Her husband died last spring. House is falling apart, but she can't afford a carpenter." He paused. "I do what I can." Constance studied his profile. For free. For what she can pay. Sometimes that's eggs, sometimes nothing. She thought of the Boston craftsmen she'd known, men who counted every penny, who charged what the market would bear, and sometimes more. Men who saw their work as profit first, service second. "That's kind," she said softly. Silas shrugged. It's necessary. They finished eating. Constance gathered the dishes, but before she could stand, Silas spoke again. There's someone I should tell you about, he said, before you hear it from the village. Constance's hand stilled. All right. He seemed to wrestle with something. There's a child, Ruth. She's 8 years old. Her father was a trapper, died last winter. Left her alone. Oh God, where is she now? With me, stays in the loft above the forge most days. Constance looked up. Sure enough, there was a ladder leading to a small platform above, half hidden in shadows. She's here now. She's shy, takes time to trust. But you're caring for her as much as she'll let me. Constance felt her chest tighten again. This man who slept in his forge to give her privacy was also sheltering an orphan child. Who was Silas Hale? I'd like to meet her, she said. When she's ready. Silas nodded slowly. I'll tell her. Constance gathered the dishes and walked back toward the cabin. But at the door she paused and looked back. Silas had returned to the forge, to the rhythmic hammering, but now knowing there was a child up in that loft, knowing he'd built a life that included caring for someone who had no one else, she found herself wondering what other secrets this quiet man held. The village of Millbrook worked hard during daylight. Constance learned this quickly as she began to venture beyond the cabin. Everyone had their tasks, their rhythms, their careful ways of surviving in this harsh place. She met them slowly, these neighbors of hers. First was Pastor Hutchins, who stopped by on her second day to ensure she was settling well. He was gentler than she expected, kinder. He spoke of Silas with respect, said he was one of the most skilled smiths in the colony, that people came from settlements 2 days ride away for his work. He's a good man, the pastor said, standing at her door. Quiet, but good. You'll find no steadier husband in Massachusetts. Then came the widow Thatcher, an old woman with bright eyes and a tongue sharp as vinegar. She brought eggs payment, she said, for the hinges Silas had made. That husband of yours charges less than he should, she declared. Too honest for his own good. You'll have to manage the money, girl. Make sure you don't starve on his generosity. But it was Abigail Thorne who truly introduced herself. She appeared on the fourth morning, a basket over her arm and a cautious smile on her face. She was perhaps 30, handsome rather than pretty, with dark hair and darker eyes. I'm Abigail, she said. Live 2 houses down the lane. Thought you might like some company. Constance invited her in gratefully. They shared tea, real tea, which Abigail had brought as a gift, and talked. Abigail was a widow. Her husband had died 3 years ago, took fever, and never recovered. She had no children. Lived alone in a house too big for one person. It's hard here, Abigail said frankly. The winters are brutal, the work never stops, and the forest. She glanced toward the window. The forest takes what it wants. Why stay? Constance asked. Where else would I go? Abigail smiled sadly. Back to England, to a father who sold me to a man twice my age. No. Here, at least I have land, a home, freedom of a sort. They talked for an hour. Abigail told her about the village, who to trust, who to avoid, which families had feuds, which had alliances. And Silas, Constance asked carefully, what should I know about him? Abigail's expression shifted. Something flickered across her face there and gone so fast Constance almost missed it. Silas is, she paused. He's complicated. Came here 5 years ago, bought the forge, kept to himself. Works harder than any 2 men, honest to a fault, but he doesn't let people close. Is there a reason? Us. Everyone has reasons, Constance. The question is whether they share them. It wasn't an answer, but Constance sensed it was all she'd get. After Abigail left, Constance stood at her window and watched the forge. Smoke rising, hammer falling, the steady rhythm of a man who worked as if motion was the only thing keeping him upright. What were you running from, Silas Hale? What brought you to the edge of the world? On the 7th night, everything changed. Constance had made dinner, a proper one with venison, that Silas had brought from the village, butcher vegetables from the cellar, bread she'd learned to bake in the cabin's small oven. She expected him to eat and leave as he always did. Instead, he lingered. Constance, he said after they'd cleared the dishes, I need to ask you something. She turned, drying her hands on her apron. Yes, Ruth. He looked uncomfortable. She needs more than I can give her. She needs a woman's teaching. She needs, let me meet her, Constance said immediately. Silas blinked. You'd be willing? Of course, she's a child who needs help, and She stopped, surprised by her own emotion. I'd like to meet her. Something in Silas's expression softened. Tomorrow, then, I'll bring her for breakfast. Ruth appeared like a ghost, small, thin, with enormous dark eyes and hair that hung in two long braids. Her skin was darker than the other children Constance had seen in the village, evidence of mixed heritage that explained so much. She stood behind Silas like he was a shield, peering around his legs at Constance. This is my wife, Silas said gently. Constance. She's kind. You don't have to be afraid. Ruth didn't speak, just watched with those huge, wary eyes. Constance knelt down slowly, making herself smaller, less threatening. Hello, Ruth. I'm very pleased to meet you. No response. Are you hungry? I've made Johnny cakes with honey. A flicker of interest. Would you like to help me serve them? Slowly, carefully, Ruth emerged from behind Silas. She moved like a wild thing ready to bolt at any moment. But she came. They ate breakfast together. Ruth took tiny bites, watching Constance constantly. Silas was quieter than usual, if that was possible, but there was something in the way he looked at the child, something protective and fierce. After the meal, Constance said, Ruth, would you like to see something special? The girl's eyes widened slightly. Constance went to her trunk and pulled out a book, one of the few precious things she'd brought from Boston, a child's primer with illustrations. Can you read? Constance asked gently. Ruth shook her head. Would you like to learn? For the first time, Ruth's expression changed. The wariness faded, replaced by something bright and desperate. Hunger. Not for food, but for knowledge. Yes, Ruth whispered, her first word. Constance's throat tightened. Then I'll teach you, every day, if you'd like. Ruth looked at Silas, seeking permission. He nodded. Every day, the girl repeated, and this time there was the ghost of a smile. The lessons became routine. Every morning, Ruth would appear, sometimes with Silas, sometimes alone. She was skittish at first, ready to flee if voices were raised or movements too sudden. But Constance was patient. She taught letters first, showed Ruth how to hold a quill, how to form the shapes. The girl was bright, frighteningly bright. She absorbed everything like parched earth soaking up rain. Within 2 weeks, Ruth was reading simple words. Within 3, she was reading sentences. And slowly, carefully, she began to trust. Why doesn't she live with her mother? Constance asked Silas one evening. They were sitting by the fire, a new pattern that had developed. Silas still slept in the forge, but he'd taken to spending the hour after dinner in the cabin, talking quietly while the flames burned low. His jaw tightened. Her mother's people were driven west. The ones who stayed, he stopped. They're not safe here. Ruth is half, but that's enough for some people to hate her. So you protect her? I try. Why, Silas? Why take that risk? He stared into the fire for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Because I know what it's like to be unwanted, to be hungry and afraid, and to have nowhere safe to go. He glanced at her. I couldn't save myself when I was her age, but I can save her. Constance felt tears prick her eyes. What happened to you? But Silas had already stood, was already reaching for his coat. Good night, Constance, he said quietly. The door closed behind him. Through the window, she watched him cross to the forge, watched the light appear in the window, watched shadows move against the glass, and she wondered what scars he carried beneath his careful stillness. November deepened into December. The cold became sharper, more insistent. Snow fell in the night and painted everything white and silent. Constance settled into rhythms, cooking, cleaning, teaching Ruth, learning to manage a household that was simpler but somehow more demanding than anything in Boston. She learned which wood burned hottest, how to bank a fire to last through the night, how to stretch supplies to make them last. She learned the names of all the villagers, their histories, their connections. And she learned to watch Silas. He was always working, up before dawn, hammer ringing until dark, taking orders from the village and from travelers who stopped on their way to settlements farther west, making tools hinges, nails horseshoes, the practical things that held civilization together on the edge of wilderness. But she began to notice other things, the way he moved, economical, precise, nothing wasted. The scars on his hands, yes, but also on his forearms. His back when she glimpsed it through his shirt. Old scars, deep ones, The careful way he modulated his voice around Ruth, never loud, never harsh. The fact that he'd built a decent life here, but lived in it like a guest, like he didn't quite believe he deserved what he'd made. One evening she asked, "Where did you come from?" Before Millbrook. Silas was repairing a chair one of the joints had loosened. His hands worked steadily, strong fingers manipulating wood like he manipulated metal. "South," he said finally. "Virginia originally. Family Siam, none worth claiming." The bitterness in those words was like acid. Constance waited, but he didn't elaborate. She'd learned that about him. He only spoke when he had something to say, and he never said more than necessary. But she'd also learned to read the silences. This one said, "Don't push, not yet." So she didn't. 3 weeks into December, the first real storm hit. It came at night, howling out of the north like something alive and hungry. Wind tore at the cabin's walls. Snow fell so thick it erased the world. Constance woke to cold. The fire had died down too much. She climbed from bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and moved to rebuild it. That's when she heard it. A sound outside. Not the wind, but something else. Footsteps. Her heart hammered. Stories circulated through the village: wolves, bears, sometimes worse things. The forest pressing close in winter, testing the boundaries. Then came a knock, firm but not aggressive. "Constance," Silas's voice muffled by the door. "I'm coming in." The door opened, bringing a blast of snow and cold. Silas entered, covered in white, his breath steaming. "Storm's bad," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "Forge is losing heat. I need to stay here tonight or risk the water freezing and cracking everything." He was asking permission. Even now, even in a storm that could kill, he was asking. "Of course," Constance said. "You should have come sooner." Silas hung his coat, brushed snow from his hair. In the firelight, his face looked drawn, tired. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said. "By the fire." "Silas, it's fine, Constance. I'm used to it." But she saw him shiver, saw the way his hands were raw from cold. "There are enough blankets for both of us," she heard herself say. "I trust you." He went still, just looked at her with those gray eyes that gave nothing away. "You don't have to. I know, but you're freezing, and this is foolish. We're married. We can share a space without—" She trailed off. Silas nodded slowly. "All right, thank you." They arranged it carefully. Constance took the side of the bed nearest the wall. Silas took the outer edge, a blanket between them like a border. They lay in the darkness, the wind screaming outside, the fire crackling. Constance was acutely aware of him, the heat of his body, the sound of his breathing, the way he held himself rigid like he was afraid to move. "Silas," she whispered. "Yes." "Why did you agree to this marriage?" Silence. "Then the land grant required a married man. Without a wife, I'd lose everything I've built." "That's practical, but there must have been other women." "There were." His voice was rough. "But I didn't want to trap someone who might have had a choice otherwise. Your father's letter said you needed this as much as I did." That felt fair. Fair. He'd married her because it felt fair. "Do you regret it?" Constance asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "No," Silas said finally. You're a good person, Constance. Better than I expected. Better than I deserve." Her chest ached. "Don't say that." "It's true. Why do you think that what happened to you?" But he'd already turned away, ending the conversation the only way he knew how, with silence. Constance lay awake long after his breathing deepened into sleep. She listened to the storm, felt the warmth of another body nearby for the first time in 2 years, and realized something that terrified her. She was beginning to care about Silas Hale. Not as an arrangement, not as a duty, but as a person. As a man who was gentle with orphaned children and charged widows, nothing for his work, and slept on forge floors because he'd given his word to a woman he barely knew. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something else was beginning, something fragile and dangerous. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that howled like wounded animals. 3 days of snow that piled waist-high against the cabin door. 3 days of a world reduced to firelight and whispered conversations in the strange intimacy of two people learning to exist in the same small space. Silas kept the fire burning. Constance kept them fed. Ruth appeared on the second day, having climbed through drifts from the forge loft, refusing to be separated from them. They played simple games. Ruth learned more letters. Constance told stories from Boston, carefully edited ones, nothing about Edmund, nothing about the life she'd lost. And slowly the walls between them began to thin. On the third night after Ruth had fallen asleep, curled in blankets by the hearth, Constance found herself sitting beside Silas at the table. A single candle burned between them. Outside, the wind was finally dying. "I've been thinking," Constance said quietly, not wanting to wake Ruth, "about what you said, that you know what it's like to be unwanted." Silas's jaw tightened. "Constance, you don't have to tell me, but I want you to know." She paused, searching for words. "I see you, the way you are with Ruth, the way you work yourself to exhaustion for people who pay you in eggs, the way you've treated me with nothing but respect, even when you had every legal right to demand more." He was looking at his hands now, those scarred, capable hands that created and mended and built. "I'm not special," he said finally. "I just do what needs doing." "That's exactly what makes you special." Silas lifted his eyes to hers then. In the candlelight, they looked darker, more vulnerable. "My father," he said and stopped, swallowed, started again. "My father was not a good man. He drank. When he drank, he used his fists. My mother died when I was young, and there was no one to stop him." Constance's heart clenched. He'd beat me for anything. For speaking, for not speaking, for existing. Silas's voice was flat, now emptied of emotion. "I left when I was 15, walked away with nothing. Taught myself to work metal because I was good with my hands and it was something I could sell. Silas, I swore I'd never be like him. Never raise my hand in anger. Never make someone afraid of me." He met her eyes. "That's why I sleep in the forge, Constance, not because I don't." He stopped. "Because I need you to know you're safe, that I'm not him." Tears were running down Constance's face now. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm, rough, real. "You are nothing like him," she said fiercely. "Nothing. Do you understand me?" Silas looked at their joined hands like he'd never seen anything quite like it before. "I want to believe that," he whispered. "Then believe it, because it's true." They sat that way for a long time, not speaking, just existing together in the quiet space between words. Outside, the storm finally broke. Inside, something else was breaking too. All the careful distance they'd maintained, all the walls they'd built to keep themselves safe, breaking. The morning after the storm, the world was transformed. Everything white and clean and almost painfully bright. The sun on snow was blinding. The air so cold it hurt to breathe. Silas went out first, carved a path through the drifts to the forge, then came back and carved another to the well, then another to the woodpile. Constance watched from the window, watched the way he moved, steady, methodical, clearing in paths for them, like he cleared everything in his life. One step at a time, one problem solved before moving to the next. Ruth pressed against her side, also watching. "He's strong," the girl said softly. "Yes, he is." "Do you like him?" Constance looked down at Ruth, those knowing, two old eyes studying her. "Yes," Constance said honestly. "I do." "Good." Ruth nodded seriously. "He needs someone to like him. He doesn't think anyone does." Out of the mouths of children, truth, the village emerged from the storm slowly. People dug out their doors, checked on neighbors, took stock of damage. 2 roofs had partially collapsed under the weight of snow. Old Mr. Brennan's chimney had cracked and would need rebuilding. Silas was called to help immediately. He went without complaint, his forged tools in hand, working alongside other men to shore up structures and make temporary repairs until proper work could be done in spring. Constance found herself cooking for the work crews, baking bread, making stews, keeping coffee hot. Other women joined her. It became a communal effort, everyone contributing what they could. Abigail Thorne worked beside her, kneading dough with practiced hands. "Your husband is well regarded," Abigail said quietly. "People trust him. He works hard. More than that, he's honest, reliable. In a place like this, that matters more than money." Constance glanced at her. You said something once about Silas not letting people close. Abigail's hands stilled for a moment. I did. But you know him. Better than most, I think. A pause, then Abigail began kneading again, her movements deliberate. When I first came to Millbrook, newly widowed and alone, my house needed work. The well had collapsed. The roof leaked. I had no money and no skills to fix it myself. Constance waited. Silas fixed everything, refused payment, said he'd want someone to do the same for him if positions were reversed. Abigail's voice was soft. I hoped perhaps it meant something more than kindness. Abigail, but it didn't. He was just being Silas, helping someone who needed help. When I tried to express my feelings, he was gentle but clear. He wasn't looking for that kind of companionship. She looked at Constance then, and there was something sad but resigned in her expression. I'm telling you this because you should know. Silas has had women interested. He's always declined. Whatever walls he's built around himself, they're high and strong. A small smile. Until you, perhaps. What do you mean? The way he looks at you, when he thinks no one's watching. It's different. Constance felt her cheeks warm. We barely know each other. Sometimes that's when it matters most, before we have time to build all our defenses. That evening, Constance made a decision. She found Silas in the forge banking the fire for the night. Ruth was already asleep in the loft above, exhausted from playing in the snow all day. Silas, Constance said, I want to learn. He turned, wiping his hands on a rag. Learn what? What you do, smithing. I want to understand it. He looked puzzled. It's hot work. Dangerous. Not women's work. Constance raised an eyebrow. I'm stronger than I look, and I'm tired of being useless. You're not useless. You teach Ruth. You keep the house. I want to learn something new. Please. Silas studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. All right, but you do exactly as I say. Fire doesn't care about good intentions. She learned. He started her on simple things. How to read the colors in hot metal orange to yellow to white, each temperature meaning something different. How to hold the tongs. How to strike with the hammer using the weight of the tool rather than muscle alone. Metal has memory, Silas explained, guiding her hand. It wants to be something. Your job is to help it remember what that is. His hands covered hers, positioning the hammer, adjusting her grip. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the forge smoke in his clothes, hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. Like this, he murmured, and they struck together. The metal rang, shaped, changed. Constance felt something shift inside her chest. This was what Silas did. This was how he made order from chaos. How he turned raw material into something useful and beautiful. And he was teaching her, trusting her with something precious. They worked together as afternoon faded to evening. Ruth watched from above, occasionally calling down observations or questions. When they finally stopped, Constance's arms ached and her face was flushed from heat and exertion. But she felt alive, more alive than she'd felt in 2 years. You're a quick study, Silas said, and there was approval in his voice. Pride even. I have a good teacher. He ducked his head, slightly uncomfortable with praise as always. But Constance saw the corner of his mouth curve, almost a smile. December deepened. The days were short now, darkness coming early and lasting long. But the cabin stayed warm. The forge stayed busy. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they became something they hadn't been before. A family. Ruth thrived under Constance's teaching. The girl who'd been silent and wary now chattered about her lessons, asked endless questions, showed her reading to Silas with obvious pride. Listen, she'd demand, and would read haltingly from the primer while Silas sat with his mending and Constance prepared dinner. They fell into rhythms, breakfast together, lessons in the morning while Silas worked. Constance would bring lunch to the forge, and they'd eat while Ruth explored the village or played in the snow. Afternoons, Constance would help with small tasks, filing, sorting, organizing the chaos of a working forge. Evening meals together, stories by the fire, Ruth asleep between them. And then the quiet hours, just Constance and Silas talking softly while the darkness pressed close outside. Constance learned about his journey from Virginia to Massachusetts, the years of wandering, working wherever he could find employment. The decision to settle in Millbrook because it was far enough from everywhere that no one asked too many questions about his past. In turn, she told him about Boston, about her mother's illness and death, about Edmund carefully, painfully, but honestly. I thought I'd marry him, she said one night, build a life, have children, do all the things young women dream about. You still can, Silas said quietly. She looked at him. Can I? Something passed between them then. Something unspoken but heavy with meaning. If you want to, Mom, Silas said finally. If you choose to. The word hung there. Choose. He'd given her that from the beginning. Choice, agency, the freedom to decide what she wanted her life to be. What if I've already chosen? Constance whispered. Silas went very still. Constance, I know this wasn't what either of us planned, but it's become something. Hasn't it? He didn't answer. Just looked at her with those gray eyes that held so much and revealed so little. Then slowly he reached out and touched her face, just his fingertips against her cheek. So gentle it was barely there. Yes, he said, voice rough. It's become something. Constance leaned into his touch, felt the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin. This man, this quiet, damaged, impossibly kind man. She was falling for him and had been falling for weeks maybe, since that first night when he'd given up his own bed rather than make her uncomfortable. Silas, she started, but he pulled back. We should sleep, he said, and there was something almost like fear in his eyes. Early start tomorrow. He stood, grabbed his coat, headed for the door. Silas, wait. But he was already gone. Constance sat alone in the firelight and felt her chest ache with something that was equal parts hope and heartbreak. The next day, Ruth didn't come for lessons. Constance waited at the cabin, growing increasingly worried as morning stretched toward midday. She finally walked to the forge, found Silas working alone. Where's Ruth? She asked. His expression darkened. The loft. She's frightened. Of what? There were men in the village yesterday, fur traders. One of them, Silas's jaw clenched, one of them knew Ruth's mother. Constance felt cold. What happened? He recognized Ruth, started asking questions, where she came from, who her people were. Silas set down his hammer carefully. I told him she was under my protection, that anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with me. What did he say? Nothing. Yet. But Ruth heard. She's been hiding ever since. Constance didn't wait for permission. She climbed the ladder to the loft. Ruth was curled in the corner, wrapped in blankets, her eyes red from crying. Sweetheart, Constance said softly, may I sit with you? Ruth nodded just barely. Constance settled beside her, not touching, just being present. I heard what happened, Constance said. That must have been very frightening. They hate people like me, Ruth whispered. My mother told me before she left. She said I'd never be safe in the white world or the native world, that I'd always be in between. Your mother said that, Ruth nodded, before she gave me to my father, said it was the only way, that he could protect me better than she could. Constance's heart broke. Oh, Ruth. But he died, and then there was nowhere until Silas. The girl's voice cracked. What if they make him send me away? What if? They won't. Constance pulled Ruth close. Silas won't let that happen, and neither will I. You promise? I promise, Amos. They sat that way for a long time, Ruth slowly relaxing her breathing, evening out. Finally, the girl said, Do you love him, Silas? Constance stilled. Why do you ask? Because he loves you, I can tell. He looks at you the way my father looked at my mother, before everything went bad. Ruth, it's okay if you do. I think it would be good, for all of us. Out of the mouths of children, truth and hope and terrifying clarity. That evening there was a knock at the cabin door. Pastor Hutchins stood on the threshold, his expression grave. May I come in? He asked. Constance let him enter. Silas emerged from the forge, sensing trouble. They gathered around the table. Ruth stayed in the loft, listening but unseen. There's been talk, the pastor said without preamble, about the child, about her heritage. I know, Silas said flatly. Some in the village are concerned. They say it's not proper, that you're unmarried keeping a girl who's not your blood. I'm married now, Silas interrupted. Yes, which helps, but there are still questions. Pastor Hutchins looked uncomfortable. They want to know where she came from, who her parents were, whether she's been properly baptized. She's a child who needed help, Constance said firmly. That's all that should matter. In a perfect world, yes, but we don't live in a perfect world, Mrs. Hale. The pastor sighed. I'm on your side. I want you to know that. But I needed to warn you. There will be a meeting. Questions will be asked. Be prepared to answer them. After he left, Silas stood by the window staring out at the darkness. I won't let them take her, he said quietly. Whatever it takes. Constance went to him, stood beside him, their reflections ghostly in the glass. We won't let them take her, she corrected. We're in this together. He looked at her then, really looked like he was seeing her for the first time. Why, he asked. Why would you fight for this? She's not yours. I'm not. We're not. Yes, Constance said simply. We are. And she took his hand. His fingers closed around hers slowly, carefully, like he was holding something infinitely precious and terribly fragile. Constance, he whispered. She stepped closer, raised her free hand to his face, tracing the line of his jaw. I choose this, she said. I choose you. I choose Ruth. I choose this life we're building together. Even though it's hard, even though there will be fights and questions, and especially because of that, because you're worth fighting for. You're both worth fighting for. Silas closed his eyes. She felt a tremor run through him. I don't deserve you, he said. Yes, you do. You just don't believe it yet. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him. Soft, brief, just a brush of lips that tasted like hope and promise in the beginning of something real. When she pulled back, Silas's eyes were open, bright with unshed tears. He started but couldn't finish. I know, Constance said. Me too. The village meeting happened 3 days later. They gathered in the meeting house, everyone who held land or had a voice in colony matters. Maybe 30 people, their faces ranging from hostile to curious to sympathetic. Silas stood at the front, Constance beside him. Ruth stayed at the cabin with Abigail, who'd volunteered to watch her. The questions came fast. Where had Ruth come from? What was her lineage? Who had legal guardianship? Had she been baptized in the Christian faith? Silas answered steadily. Honestly, he explained about the trapper father who died, about finding Ruth alone and starving, about taking her in because it was the right thing to do. But she's half native, someone said, Thomas Pritchard, a farmer whose land bordered the forest. We've had trouble with the tribes. Having her here is a risk. She's 8 years old, Constance said sharply. She's not a risk. She's a child. A child who could be used against us. Who might have loyalties to? Her loyalty is to the people who've shown her kindness, Silas interrupted. To safety and warmth and not being afraid. If you think an 8-year-old girl is your enemy, maybe you should look closer at what that says about you. Silence. Then Pastor Hutchins stood. I've visited Silas's home. I've seen the child. She's well cared for, clean-fed, learning her letters. The Hales are providing her with a Christian upbringing and a stable home. What more do you want? We want to know she won't bring trouble, Pritchard insisted. The only trouble here is the kind we make ourselves, Abigail Thorne said, surprising everyone. She stood in the back, arms crossed. Silas Hale has done more for this village than most of you. Fixed your tools, repaired your homes, asked nothing in return. And now you want to punish him for saving a child's life. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I say let them keep her, another voice called. Martha Green, the widow. God knows this settlement needs more compassion, not less. Others began to nod. Speak up, the tide was turning. Finally, the village elder, a man named Josiah Reed, raised his hand for silence. This matter will be put to a vote, he said. All in favor of allowing the Hales to continue guardianship of the child called Ruth. Hands rose. Constance counted, held her breath. More than half, easily more than half. Opposed, fewer hands, not many. The matter is settled, Reed said. Ruth remains with the Hales. Meeting adjourned. They walked home through the cold darkness, relief making their steps light. We did it, Constance said. They can't take her now. Because of you, Silas replied. The way you spoke, the way you stood up for her, for us. I meant what I said. She's ours. We're a family. Silas stopped walking, turned to face her fully. The moon was bright on the snow. His face was silver and shadow, but his eyes were clear. Constance Hale, he said. I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. Yes, I'm falling in love with you. The words came out rough but certain. Have been for weeks. Maybe from the first time you brought breakfast to the forge. Maybe before that. I don't know exactly when it started, but I know I can't stop it. And I don't want to. Tears spilled down Constance's cheeks. Silas, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know in case, he swallowed, in case you ever wondered whether this was real for me. It's real for me too, Constance whispered. I love you. I didn't think I could ever feel this way again, but you made me believe in it, in us. He kissed her then, not soft this time, but deep, passionate, full of everything they'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas pressed his forehead to hers. I'm not good at this, he said, at being a husband, at being loved. Then we'll learn together, both of us. They made it back to the cabin hand in hand. Ruth was asleep in the main room, Abigail watching over her. How did it go? Abigail asked quietly. We won, Constance said. Abigail smiled a real smile despite whatever pain it might have caused her. Good, that's good. After she left, Silas carried Ruth to the loft, tucked her in with gentle hands. Then he came back round to where Constance waited. Stay, she said simply. No more forge, no more sleeping alone. Stay here, with me. Silas looked at the bed, at her, at the life they'd built in this small cabin against all odds. Are you sure? He asked. I've never been more sure of anything. So he stayed. They lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, learning the shape and warmth of each other. And for the first time since arriving in Millbrook, Constance felt like she was truly home. 2 weeks later, the letter came. A writer from Boston, exhausted and half frozen, delivered it to Pastor Hutchins. The pastor brought it to the cabin personally. Constance recognized her father's seal. Her hands shook as she broke it open. Silas stood close, reading over her shoulder. Dearest Constance, I pray this letter finds you well, though I fear the news it carries may cause you distress. The business has failed completely. The creditors have taken everything, the house, the holdings, all remaining assets. I am ruined. I must confess something I should have told you before. The marriage I arranged was not simply convenience. It was necessity. Mr. Hale paid a sum to secure your hand enough to satisfy my most pressing debts. You were never meant to know this. I told myself I was protecting you, giving you a fresh start. But the truth is I sold you to save myself. I do not expect forgiveness. I write only so you might know the full truth of your situation. Your father, Edward Merrick. The letter fluttered from Constance's hands. Sold. She'd been sold, like property, like livestock. Constance, Silas said carefully. She turned to him, saw the guilt in his eyes. You knew, she whispered. You knew the whole time. Yes. And you didn't tell me. No. She felt something crack inside her chest. All the trust they'd built. All the love she'd let herself feel. Based on lies. Get out, she said quietly. Constance, please. Get out. Silas flinched like she'd struck him. But he went, grabbed his coat and left without another word. Constance sank to the floor and let herself finally completely break. 3 days passed in silence. Constance stayed in the cabin. Silas stayed in the forge. Ruth moved between them like a small ghost, confused and frightened by the sudden cold that had descended on their makeshift family. Why won't you talk to him? Ruth asked on the third morning, watching Constance knead bread with more force than necessary. It's complicated, sweetheart. He's sad. I can hear him at night. He doesn't sleep. Constance's hands stilled. She hadn't slept either. Just lay awake, staring at the empty space beside her where Silas had been for those few precious nights. He lied to me, Ruth. Did he? The girl's voice was quiet but steady. Or did he just not tell you something that would have hurt you? That's the same thing. It's it. Ruth came closer, small hands sticky with a flower. My mother didn't tell me she was leaving. She just put me in my father's arms one night and walked away. I was angry for a long time. Thought she didn't love me. Constance looked down at the girl. Oh, Ruth. But she did love me. She left because staying would have gotten us both killed. Sometimes people who love us keep secrets to protect us even when the secrets hurt. 8 years old and already wise beyond her years, Constance felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I can forgive him, she whispered. Maybe you don't have to forgive him yet. Maybe you just have to talk to him. But before Constance could decide whether to bridge that gap, the world made the decision for her. The stranger arrived on the fourth day. Constance was bringing water from the well when she saw him, a man on horseback dressed too fine for the frontier. Dark coat, polished boots, a face she recognized even from a distance. Her blood turned to ice. Edmund Carlyle. He dismounted in front of the cabin, tied his horse, and turned to face her. He looked older, thinner. There was a scar across his left cheek that hadn't been there before, but it was undeniably him. The man she'd mourned, the man she'd been supposed to marry, the man who was supposed to be dead. Constance, he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered. Smooth, cultured, Boston bred. Thank God, I've finally found you. The water bucket slipped from her numb fingers. Edmund moved toward her, reaching out, but she stumbled back. You're dead, she whispered. They said you were dead. I nearly was. His hand went to the scar on his face. The attack, I was injured, taken by the natives. Held for months. By the time I escaped, by the time I made it back to Boston, he paused. You were gone. Married. Your father said there was nothing to be done. Constance couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. 2 years of grief and guilt, and slowly learning to live again, and he'd been alive the whole time. I had to find you, Edmund continued. Had to know you were safe. Had to... He stopped, really looked at her. Constance, are you all right? This place, this marriage? I know your father arranged it to settle debts. You don't have to stay. I have money now. Compensation from the colony for my captivity. I can buy out your contract, take you home. This is my home. The words came out before she'd thought them through. Edmund's expression shifted. What? This is my home, Constance repeated, and as she said it, she knew it was true. I'm not contracted property. I'm married. I have a life here. But you were forced into it. Your father told me everything, sold to some frontier smith. His name is Silas, and I wasn't sold. I was... She stopped. What had she been? It started as arrangement, but it became something more. Edmund's face hardened. You can't possibly love him. You loved me. I did love you, past tense. Constance felt tears on her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. I mourned you. I grieved. And then I learned to live again. With Silas. With Ruth. I built something here, Edmund. Something real. With a man who bought you like livestock. He didn't. But she stopped. Because that was exactly what Silas had done, wasn't it, Alston? Paid her father money in exchange for her hand. Even if everything that came after had been real, the foundation was still a transaction. Come with me, Edmund said more gently. We can have the life we plan. Boston, society, children, everything we wanted. Constance looked at him. This man she'd once imagined spending her life with. Handsome, educated, kind in his own way. But when she thought of a future, she didn't see Boston anymore. She saw the forge, firelight, Silas's scarred hands creating beauty from raw metal, Ruth's laughter as she learned to read, the quiet nights by the fire talking until the embers died. No, she said softly. Thank you, but no. Edmund stared at her. You're choosing him, this life, this frozen wilderness. I'm choosing myself, Constance corrected. And yes, that includes him, includes Ruth, includes this place that's become home. Then you're a fool. Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool who's happy than a woman living someone else's dream. Edmund's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might argue further. Instead, he nodded stiffly. I see. Then I've wasted my time. He moved toward his horse, paused. If you change your mind, I'm staying at the inn for 3 more days. After that, I return to Boston. Alone. He rode away without looking back. Constance stood in the snow and felt something settle inside her chest. She'd made her choice. Now she just needed to make sure Silas knew that. She found him in the forge. He was working metal, a horseshoe from the shape. The hammer rang steady and sure, but there was something mechanical about it, like he was going through motions without thought. Silas, she said from the doorway. The hammer stopped mid-strike. He set it down carefully, didn't turn around. Edmund Carlyle is here, Constance said. My former fiancé, the one who was supposed to be dead. Silas's shoulders went rigid. He wants me to go back to Boston with him. She moved closer. Offered to buy out my contract. Said I didn't have to stay in a marriage I was forced into. And what did you tell him? Silas's voice was rough, barely controlled. I told him no. Now Silas did turn. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes, stubble shadowing his jaw. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Why, he asked. Because this is my home. Because Ruth needs me. Because, she stopped. Because I love you, Silas Hale, even though you lied to me, even though you knew the truth about how our marriage started and didn't tell me. I should have told you, Silas said immediately. Should have been honest from the beginning, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd leave, that you'd realize what I was. A man so desperate for companionship that he paid money for a wife like she was property. Is that really why you did it? Constance asked quietly. Just for companionship. Silas looked at her for a long moment. No, your father's letter mentioned you'd lost someone, that you were grieving, that you needed a fresh start somewhere people didn't know your past. He swallowed. I knew what that felt like. To need escape, to need somewhere safe to heal. So you gave me that. I tried. And somewhere along the way, his voice cracked. Somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as an arrangement and started thinking of you as everything. Constance closed the distance between them, took his hands in hers, those scarred, capable hands that had built a life for them. I'm angry, she said honestly, about the secret, about not being told. But I understand why you kept it, and I don't want to lose what we have over something that started wrong but became right. Constance, I choose you, she said fiercely, not because I'm contracted to, not because Edmund is offering escape, but because you're the man I want, the one who sleeps in his forge to make me feel safe, the one who protects orphaned children, the one who taught me that love isn't always the grand romance I imagined, but sometimes it's just showing up every day, building something together. Silas pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. She felt him shaking. I love you, he whispered. God help me. I love you so much. Then we'll figure out the rest together. They stood that way for a long time, holding each other in the forge's warmth while the world stayed cold outside. But the world wasn't done testing them yet. Ruth came running 2 hours later, breathless and terrified. They're talking, she gasped. At the inn, the stranger Edmund, he's telling people about the marriage, about the money, about how you bought Constance. Silas's expression darkened. What are they saying? That it's not proper, that she should go back with him, that a marriage based on money isn't blessed by God. Ruth's eyes were wide. Some people are agreeing, saying Constance should have a choice, a real choice. Constance felt ice form in her stomach. They just weathered one village meeting. Could they survive another? Let them talk, Silas said grimly. They can't unmake a legal marriage, but they can make life difficult, Constance said quietly. Can ostracize us, refuse to do business with you, make Ruth's life hell. Silas looked at her. What do you want to do? Face them together, show them that whatever this started as it's real now. So they did. They walked to the meeting house that evening, all three of them. Constance, Silas, and Ruth, a united front. The room was packed. Edmund stood near the front, looking righteous and wounded. Abigail was there, and Pastor Hutchins, and most of the village. The question before us, Edmund said with practiced eloquence, is whether we as Christians can condone a marriage built on commerce rather than love. Whether we can allow a woman to be held in bondage, spiritual and legal, to a man who purchased her like property. Murmurs of agreement. Constance stepped forward. May I speak? Edmund looked surprised but nodded. She faced the crowd, felt Silas solid beside her, Ruth's small hand clutching hers. Mr. Carlyle is right, she said clearly. My marriage began as a transaction. My father was in debt, Silas needed a wife for his land grant. Money changed hands. More murmurs, shocked faces. But here's what Mr. Carlyle doesn't understand. Constance's voice grew stronger. Marriage, real marriage, isn't about how it starts. It's about what you build. And Silas and I have built something true. She turned to look at Silas. He gave me choice when he didn't have to, gave me space to grieve, taught me to find joy again. He took in a child nobody wanted and gave her safety and love. He works himself to exhaustion, helping this village, asks nothing in return. Facing the crowd again. So yes, our marriage started as arrangement, but it became a partnership, became love. And if you think that's any less blessed by God than the proper courtships you're imagining, then you don't understand what marriage really is. Silence. Then Pastor Hutchins stood. The girl speaks truth. I've watched this couple. I've seen how they care for each other, for the child, for this community. Whatever the origins, what they have now is real and sacred. But the money, Edmund started. What of it? Abigail Thorne interrupted and standing as well. Half the marriages in this colony were arranged. Half the women here came as indentured servants or mail-order brides. Are we all damned because our unions began with practicality rather than romance? Women began nodding, standing, adding their voices, because Abigail was right. In the colonies, survival came first. Love, if it came at all, came later. Edmund's face reddened. This is different. Constance was mine first. We had an understanding. I was never yours, Constance said quietly but firmly. We were engaged, yes, but you died, or we thought you did. I mourned you. I let you go. And then I built a new life. You can't simply appear 2 years later and expect everything to go back to how it was. You loved me once. I did. Past tense. She looked at Silas. But I love him now. Present tense. Future tense. All the tenses that matter. Edmund stared at her. Then slowly his shoulders slumped. I see, he said quietly. Then I truly have lost you. You lost me the day you ran into those burning buildings. Constance said, not unkindly. I'm sorry for your suffering, but you can't ask me to abandon the life I've built to resurrect one that's already dead. He nodded once, looked at Silas. Take care of her. With my life, Silas replied. Edmund turned and walked out. The room exhaled collectively. I say we recognize the Hale marriage as legitimate and blessed, Pastor Hutchins declared. All in favor. Hands rose. More than before. Opposed. A few scattered hands. The matter is settled. Again. They walked home through darkness. Ruth skipped ahead, relieved and exhausted. Constance walked beside Silas, their hands linked. Thank you, Silas said quietly, for what you said. For choosing us, Constance interrupted. I chose us. All three of us. At the cabin, they got Ruth settled for bed. The girl was asleep within minutes, worn out by the day's emotion. Constance and Silas stood by the fire. Come to bed, Constance said. Really come to bed, not as an arrangement, but as husband and wife. Silas looked at her. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. So they did. They lay together in the darkness, learning each other slowly, gently, thoroughly. And when Silas whispered that he loved her, Constance kissed him and whispered it back. This was marriage. Not the transaction it began as, but what they'd made it into. Choice and commitment and love that grew slowly like metal shaped by patient hands. 2 weeks later, the second storm came. Worse than the first. Wind that screamed like fury. Snow that fell so thick you couldn't see 3 feet ahead. They prepared as best they could, secured the buildings, brought in extra wood-filled buckets with water. The storm hit at midday. By evening, the world was white chaos. Constance, Silas, and Ruth huddled in the cabin, listening to the wind tear at the walls. It'll pass, Silas said, but even he sounded uncertain. Then around midnight they heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not wind or snow, but something else, scratching at the door. Silas grabbed the rifle, moved carefully to the entrance. Who's there? He called. A weak voice. Help, please. He opened the door. Edmund Carlyle fell through, covered in snow and ice, his face blue with cold. They pulled him to the fire immediately, stripped off his frozen clothes, wrapped him in blankets, forced warm liquid down his throat. What happened? Constance demanded. Edmund's teeth chattered so hard he could barely speak. Left the inn. Tried to ride to Boston. Storm. Caught me. Horse. Threw me. Walked. Not sure how long. He'd nearly died. Another hour and he would have frozen. They worked through the night, keeping him warm, keeping him conscious. Silas never left his side despite everything. Despite the fact that this man had tried to take his wife, because that's who Silas was. By morning, Edmund was stable, weak but alive. "Why did you help me?" he asked when he could speak clearly. "After everything I said," Silas looked at him steadily. "Because it was the right thing to do, because out here we don't let people die over hurt feelings." Edmund stared at him, then at Constance. "You really do love him, don't you?" "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Edmund closed his eyes. "Then I'm glad. Glad you found something real. Even if it means I lost you." He stayed 2 more days recovering his strength. The storm raged outside, trapping them all together. But something shifted during those days. Edmund stopped fighting, stopped arguing. Instead, he watched them, Constance teaching Ruth letters, Silas working at small projects by the fire, the quiet intimacy of a family that had chosen each other. On the third morning when the storm finally broke, Edmund prepared to leave. "Thank you," he said at the door, "for saving my life, for showing me," he paused, "for showing me what love actually looks like." "Be well, Edmund," Constance said gently. He mounted his horse, a borrowed one from the village, and rode toward Boston. This time Constance didn't watch him go. She turned back to the cabin, to Silas waiting in the doorway, to Ruth peering around his legs, to home. Spring came slowly to Massachusetts. The snow melted grudgingly, revealing brown earth and the first green shoots of new growth. Ice broke up in the streams. Birds returned from their southern migrations. The village emerged from winter like survivors emerging from a siege, exhausted but victorious. And in the cabin at the edge of the settlement, life continued. Constance was teaching Ruth to write full sentences now. The girl's progress was remarkable. She devoured knowledge like she'd once been starved for it. "When I'm grown," Ruth announced one afternoon, "I want to be a teacher, like you." Constance's heart swelled. "Then we'll make sure you can be." Silas's business grew. Word had spread about his skills, his honesty, his fair prices. People came from settlements 2 days' ride away, bringing work and payment and respect. He hired an apprentice, a young man named Thomas, who was eager to learn the forge. "So I can spend more time here," Silas explained to Constance, "with you and Ruth, building the life we want instead of just surviving." They planted a garden that spring, vegetables and herbs and flowers that Constance had loved in Boston. "Making it beautiful," she said, hands in the soil, "not just functional." As Silas built a bench beside the cabin where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset, Ruth carved her name into the doorframe, messy but proud. "So everyone knows this is my home," she said. And it was. Home, not perfect. They still fought, sometimes Constance, about Silas working too hard, Silas about Constance being too generous with their supplies. Ruth went through phases of nightmares, remembering her mother, grieving what she'd lost. But they worked through it together. 3 people who'd been broken in different ways, finding wholeness in each other. On a warm day in May, Constance realized she was late. Late in the way that meant something significant. She said nothing for 2 weeks, wanting to be sure. But when the sickness started each morning, when her body began to change in subtle ways, she knew. She found Silas in the forge, teaching Thomas a particularly complex joint. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Privately." They walked to their bench, sat in the afternoon sun. "I'm pregnant," Constance said simply. Silas went absolutely still. "You're—" He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. "Yes, about 2 months, I think." He stood abruptly, walked a few steps away, came back. His face was cycling through emotions too fast to track: joy, fear, wonder, terror. "Silas," Constance stood, took his hands. "Talk to me." "I don't know how to be a father," he said, voice raw. "My father was— I don't want to be him. Don't want to hurt—" "You won't," Constance said fiercely. "Look at how you are with Ruth. Gentle, patient, kind. You're already a father in every way that matters." "But what if I'm not enough? What if I fail?" "Then we'll fail together and get up and try again. That's what families do." Silas pulled her close, held her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Our baby." When they told Ruth, she was ecstatic. Demanded to know everything about babies, insisted she'd help care for the new sibling, started planning immediately. "Boy or girl?" she asked. "We don't know yet." Constance laughed. "Either is good. I'll teach them letters and how to avoid the mean kids in the village." And she chattered on, already deeply invested in being the best older sister possible. The baby came in January during a night when the world was frozen and silent. A daughter, small and perfect and screaming with the fury of all new life. Constance held her, exhausted and elated. Silas stood beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. "What should we name her?" Constance asked softly. Silas touched the baby's tiny hand with one careful finger. "Eleanor," he said, "after my mother, the only person who ever showed me kindness before I ran." "Eleanor Hale," Constance repeated. "It's perfect." Ruth pressed close, staring at her new sister with wonder. "She's so small." "You were once too," Constance said, "and look at you now, so big and capable and brave." Ruth carefully touched the baby's cheek. "I'll protect her," she declared. "Always." Years passed. Eleanor grew from infant to toddler to child. Ruth became a young woman, still fierce, still bright, eventually teaching at the small school the village built. More children came. A son they named Daniel. Twin girls, Grace and Hope. The cabin expanded, added rooms, became a home that rang with laughter and arguments in the chaos of family life. Silas's forge prospered. He became the master smith for 3 settlements, training apprentices, creating work that people prized. But he always made time for Constance, for the children, for the quiet evenings when they'd sit on their bench and watch the sunset paint the sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Constance asked one evening, their hands linked as they'd been for years now. "The arrangement, the way we started." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Then every path leads somewhere. Ours led here. To you, to Ruth, to our children, to this life. How could I regret that, even though it started with money and desperation, especially because of that? The best things often start in dark places. They just need time and care to grow toward the light." Constance leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Silas Hale. I love you, Constance Hale. Have from the moment you brought breakage to my forge and looked at me like I was worth knowing." They sat as the light faded. Behind them in the cabin, their children were settling for the night. Ruth was reading to the younger ones, the same primer Constance had once used to teach her. The forge chimney still smoked. The forest still pressed close. Winter would come again as it always did. But they were ready. They'd survived worse together. 2 people who'd been broken and lost had found each other on the edge of the wilderness, had built something from nothing, had chosen each other every day through storms and struggles and the slow, patient work of love, an arranged marriage that had become the truest kind of love, the kind that's forged in fire and shaped by time, the kind that lasts the end. They say love is about timing, about luck, about fate bringing the right people together at the right moment. But sometimes love is simpler than that. Sometimes it's just 2 broken people choosing to build something whole, to show up day after day and shape something beautiful from the raw material of their lives. Silas and Constance Hale lived another 40 years together in that cabin at the edge of Millbrook. They saw Massachusetts grow from wild frontier to established colony. They saw their children marry and have children of their own. Ruth became the village teacher, never married, content with the family she'd chosen. And when they were old, when their hands were gnarled and their steps slow, they still sat on that bench each evening, still held hands, still chose each other, the way they always had, the way they always would, until the very end.